Shalom Aleichem. We are in Parshat Matot and Maseh. This week we have a double Torah portion. Most years these two Parshiot are read together. And we start in the ArtScroll Chumash on page 901. The Parsha begins with laws of vows and oaths. What happens if a person makes a promise? And the Torah says, Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes of children of Israel, saying, this is what Hashem commanded. If a man takes a vow to Hashem or swears an oath to establish a prohibition upon himself, he shall not desecrate his word. According to whatever comes from his mouth shall he do. Here we learn two mitzvot. One, to fulfill what you promise. And from here we see that our words have an effect. And what we say has influence on the reality. If we say that something is forbidden, like it says, to establish a prohibition upon himself, if I say, this is forbidden to me, it actually becomes forbidden. How forbidden? As if it is a Torah prohibition. I am like God. In which way? Just like God gave us mitzvot, positive commandments and prohibitions, so too a Jew can create a mitzvah. A Jew can create a prohibition upon himself with his words alone, or a Jew can create an obligation to fulfill a positive act. For example, if a person says, I promise that today I'm going to visit my father or my friend, that becomes an obligation for him today, as if God commanded him. And we have a negative commandment not to delay fulfillment of your vow. For example, if you didn't set a time, you didn't say today I will, but rather you said I promise to donate money to charity. It becomes an obligation, and even though you didn't specify when, you have a negative commandment not to delay it. And for example, with offerings, if you said, I promise to bring an offering to Beit HaMikdash, you have 3 festivals to bring it. After the 3rd festival, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, once Sukkot finishes and you didn't bring, you had 3 chances you didn't bring, you transgress this commandment. The commandment not to delay your vow. Okay. Now we continue. So for a man, it's simple. If a man means a boy over 13 for sure, his vows are obligatory, and a boy over 12, we have to check out if he knows what he is saying, if he knows the significance of his words, then his vows are valid. And for a girl over 12, the vows are valid, and over 11 we have to check her out if she is mature enough to understand her words. And now, what if the woman is in the house of her father? She is not yet mature. She is under 12 and a half years old, and she is not married. Then the Torah gives a special permission to her father to cancel her vows. Which means, if a girl turned 12, but she is not yet 12 and a half, in that half a year, the father is able to cancel her vows. Now, the Torah says in verse 4, If a woman will take a vow to Hashem or establish a prohibition in her father's home, in her youth, the words in her youth mean that she is not yet 12 and a half years old, and her father was silent about the vow, he heard it and he didn't protest, then all her vows shall stand, and any prohibition that she established upon herself shall stand. The father doesn't have to approve it. As long as the father did not protest, the father did not cancel the vow is obligatory upon her. Verse 6, but if her father restrained her on the day of his hearing, all her vows and all her prohibitions shall not stand. So if the father is quiet, her vow is valid. If the father approves it, then certainly her vow is valid. However, if the father disagrees with the vow and restrains her by saying, I don't allow you to follow your vow, then the vow is cancelled. And the verse finishes, and Hashem will forgive her, for the father had restrained her. And the commentators struggle with these words. What does it mean that Hashem will forgive her? For what? She made a vow, the father said nothing doing, so there is no vow. Why forgiveness? And then they explain that she made a vow, and the father, when he heard it, cancelled her vow. However, she didn't hear that the father cancelled the vow. So she thinks that the vow is still valid. And she found it difficult, and she decided to break her vow. And she actually went against the vow. In her mind, she was transgressing. But in reality, the vow was no longer valid, because the father cancelled it. So the question is, her intent was to transgress, but there was nothing to transgress. Is this a sin or not? And according to Torah, yes. Since her intent was to transgress, and she did everything to transgress, she made a decision and she followed through. Therefore, she needs atonement. She needs forgiveness. And certainly a man who goes against his vow on purpose, and there actually is a vow in force, then for sure he transgressed, and for sure he needs forgiveness. Now verse 7 discusses the case of a married woman. If she shall be married to a man and her vows were upon her. Now Rashi says that this is a special case. She is not fully married. She is only engaged to her groom. Then verse 8, and her husband heard, and he was silent about her, then her vows shall stand. And Rashi explains that this refers to the case where the father also participates in the canceling of the vow. That means, since she's engaged, so she's 1 foot out of the father's house, but at the same time she's not fully married, and therefore the father still has control over her. The father and the groom share their ability in canceling her vow. And you need both of them to disagree in order for the vow to be cancelled. But if the father agrees or is silent, or the husband, as the Torah says, he was silent, if the groom is silent agreement, even if the father disagrees, it's not enough, because she is already 1 foot out of the father's house. Verse 9, but if on the day of her husband's hearing he shall restrain her, and he shall revoke the vow, then Hashem will forgive her. And here again it means that the father will also restrain her, and the groom will restrain, then the vow is not valid. Now, verse 10 speaks about a woman who used to be married and she is no longer married, a widow or a divorcee. The vow of a widow or a divorcee shall remain upon her, because she came out of the father's house by marrying. Even if she gets divorced or becomes a widow, she does not go under the control of her father. She is fully independent, and her vows stand just like of a man. And the next case is the case of a fully married woman. Now she is no longer under the authority of her father, only the husband. But if she vowed in her husband's home, she is no longer in the father's home, she is fully married. Or she established a prohibition upon herself through an oath in her husband's home, and her husband heard about it and was silent about it. He did not restrain her, that's the main part. Then all her vows shall stand, and any prohibition she established upon herself shall stand. However, there is limitation to the power of the husband. Which vow can the husband cancel? Verse 14 explains, any vow to cause personal affliction. If she made a vow that will cause her pain or suffering or damage, that's the kind of vow that the husband can cancel. Or, as verse 17 says, these are the decrees that Hashem commanded Moshe between a man and his wife. This is the second case that the husband can cancel a vow, and that is things that interfere between him and his wife. So, an example of the first condition, if the wife says, that's it, I'm not eating meat from now on. So that is something that is causing her suffering, and therefore the husband has authority to cancel that vow. Or if she says, that's it, I'm not putting on makeup anymore. Enough of this unhealthy stuff. And this is something that will cause issues between the husband and her. The husband can say, no, I cancel your vow, which means you are allowed to put on makeup. These are examples where husband can cancel the vow. However, if the vow is not going to cause her pain or suffering, and it's nothing between the husband and the wife, it's her own business, then she's independent, she can make the vow and no one can cancel it. Now we go to chapter 31, and here is the repetition of the commandment to fight a war against Midianites. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, take vengeance for the children of Israel against the Midianites, and afterwards you will be gathered unto your people. Hashem tells Moshe that after the final battle, Moshe will die. And Moshe did not delay. Verse 3, Moshe spoke to the people saying, arm men from among yourselves for the legion, that they may be against Midian, to inflict Hashem's vengeance against Midian. He himself took charge of the command to make sure that the war happens as fast as possible. This is the way of the Jewish leaders. They don't worry about their own popularity. They don't worry about their own benefit. They don't worry about the benefit of their family. Rather, they worry only for the benefit of the Jewish people. And how many soldiers? Verse 4, 1,000 from a tribe. 1,000 from a tribe. For all the tribes of Israel shall you send to the legion. So total 12,000 soldiers were sent, and from the repetition of the expression 1,000 from a tribe, and again 1,000 from a tribe, the commentators learn that in fact there were 2,000 from each tribe. However, only 1,000 went out to fight as soldiers. The second 1,000 stayed in the back. For what reason? In order to pray for those that went to fight. And that is why in current wars between the Jews and their Arab aggressors, we collect names of Jewish soldiers and we distribute one name per person, and a Jew, whether here in America or in Israel, prays for a soldier, a personal protector. And then we know that yes, the physical soldiers go out to fight physical war, but a spiritual soldier, another Jew, sitting in his own home or in a synagogue, is protecting that physical soldier. Now, if we think about the proportion of Jewish soldiers against the soldiers of the Midian, the Midrash says that when these 12,000 Jewish soldiers were marching against Midian, Bilam came out to speak to them, and he made fun of them. He said, "You think that you're going to win against Midian? Look what happened just recently. When you were the entire camp together, 3 million people, 600,000 soldiers, you were encamped in your own territory, and just Midianite ladies went to fight against you. They killed 24,000 Jewish men. And now you have only 12,000 soldiers, and you think you can win against the whole Midianite army while they are in their home territory?" So Bilam laughed at them and he said, "You're not going to succeed." And even though Bilam was a sorcerer, and for sure he could tell them the future based on stars, and he could open the book and look at their palm and tell them exactly what's going to happen, and in fact he did. However, the end was not so, because Bilam failed to recognize that the reason the 24,000 soldiers died was not because the Midianites were stronger, but because Jewish people sinned against Hashem. And it's not that Midianite ladies killed 24,000 Jewish men, but rather Hashem punished them. However, from Bilam's words, we see that physical chances of Jewish people winning the war were very slim. And now let's see why. When they went and they fought, of course they won. And then they killed all males and all adult females. And they only saved girls who were so young that there was no possibility that they were violated. There was no possibility that these girls were ever raped or married or any other way had contact with men, which means only girls 3 years old or younger. And how many girls of 3 years old or younger were they? The Torah tells us that there were 32,000 girls. Now, if you extrapolate 32,000 girls for only 3 years, from 0 to 3, and you multiply it by the entire lifetime expectancy times all the men, you will come to about 1.5 million to 2 million people. And that means that again, extrapolating to how many soldiers they had, you could safely assume that the Midianites had about 300,000 soldiers. And Jewish people are sending 12,000 soldiers against the entire army of 300,000 soldiers. And of course, Bilam was laughing at them. You think that this tiny army can win? And that's exactly what happened. Verse 6. Moshe sent them, 1,000 from each tribe for the legion. Them and Pinchas, son of Elazar the Kohen. They massed against Midian, and they killed every male. They killed the kings of Midian. How many kings? 5 kings are listed. Evi, Rekem, Sur, Hur, and Reva. And Bilam, son of Beor, they slew with the sword. Finally, they were able to pay him fully for all the trouble he caused the Jewish people. The children of Israel took captive the women of Midian and their young children. So far, they didn't kill women and they didn't kill children of Midian, the boys. They brought all of them with them. And all their cattle and flocks and all their wealth they took as spoils. And all their cities and all their palaces they burned in fire. They didn't settle their land. It was a little bit off to the side, away from the land of Israel. They didn't want it, so they just burnt their inhabited places. They brought to Moshe and Elazar the Kohen. Elazar was the father of Pinchas. And verse 14 says that Moshe was angry with the commanders of the army. He rebuked them for saving women and boys. And he explained to them that these boys are going to grow up as enemies of the Jews and they're going to continue fighting. We have to eliminate them while they are young. And these women, in verse 15, Moshe said to them, "Did you let every female live? Behold, it was they who caused the children of Israel to commit a betrayal against Hashem regarding the matter of Peor, and the plague occurred in the assembly of Hashem. Why did you let these women who sinned with the Jewish man to stay alive? So now, kill every male among the young children and every woman fit to have relations with a man." Now in verse 19, after they have done what was required, they were supposed to purify themselves from the impurity of the dead body. "As for you, encamp outside the camp for 7-day period. Whoever killed a person or touched a corpse shall purify yourselves on the 3rd and the 7th day with the ashes of the red cow." Now in verse 21, we have laws of koshering utensils. And the general rule is, as it absorbs the non-kosher food, so it expels it. This is the decree of the Torah, which Hashem commanded Moshe. If you have a utensil made of gold, now it lists a few examples of metals: gold or silver or copper or iron or tin or lead. At that time they only used 6 kinds of metals: gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, and lead. Everything that comes into the fire, if you cook with it in fire, you shall pass through the fire, and it will be purified. But it must be purified with the water of sprinkling. And everything that would not come in the fire, you shall pass through the water. Which means, if it's only used with cold water, cold food, then it's enough just to wash it. Now, the next paragraph we learn about the division of spoils. After they have brought a lot of animals, hundreds of thousands of animals, and 32,000 young girls, and gold and silver, Moshe said it's only right to divide these spoils between soldiers and the rest of the nation. As we said before, the rest of the nation also participated in war, partially by supplying them with food and materials, and partially by praying for them. Hashem said to Moshe, calculate the total of the captured spoils and divide the spoils in half between those who undertook the battle and the entire assembly. They split it equally. However, there were only 12,000 soldiers who actually fought, and the rest of the nation, 600,000 men. So even though the spoils were divided equally, but each man got a different amount, depending if he was a soldier or was stayed behind. Now, in addition to receiving the spoils, every person had to separate a portion for either Kohanim or Levim. You shall raise up a portion from the men of war, 1 out of 500. So they gave the proportion 1 out of 500 from every human being and every animal. And that went to Kohanim. And from the half of the children of Israel, take 1 out of 50 from the people and from animals and give it to the Levites. And they did just that. And the next 2 paragraphs describe the total number of spoils and how they divided it. And I'm quickly going to go through it. The total spoils were sheep. There were 675,000 sheep. And there were 72,000 cows. And there were 61,000 donkeys. And there were 32,000 young girls. And each half, accordingly, received 337,500 sheep, 36,000 cows, and 30,500 donkeys, and 16,000 young girls. The contribution to the Kohanim is calculated. Kohanim received 675 sheep, 72 cows, 61 donkeys, and 32 young girls to be their slaves. And the portion for Levim was much larger, 1 out of 50, 6,750 sheep, 720 cows, 610 donkeys, and 320 young girls as servants. Now, verse 48 tells us that the officers this time voluntarily brought an offering as well. The officers of the thousands and the officers of the hundreds approached Moshe, and they said to Moshe, we took a census of the soldiers, and not a man of us is missing. Not even a single soldier is missing in battle. Even though they killed hundreds of thousands of Midianites, not even one Jewish soldier died, Baruch Hashem. So we have brought a voluntary offering for Hashem as a thank you. Gold vessels like bracelets and rings and earrings and clasps and so on, to atone for our souls before Hashem. Because there is a concept that if Hashem performs a miracle for you, it takes away some of the merit. So they were concerned.